Thank you, Senator. One, I think America has got to continue to lead. This happened in America. I'm very proud that it happened in America.
By the way, I think that's right, and that's why I'd be much more confident if we had our agency as opposed to got involved in international discussions. Ultimately, you want the rules of the road, but I think if we lead and get rules of the road that work for us, that is probably a more effective way to proceed.
I personally believe there's a way to do both, and I think it is important to have the global view on this because this technology will impact Americans and all of us wherever it's developed. But I think we want America to lead. We want.
So get to the perils issue, though, because I know.
Well, that's one. I mean, that is a peril, which is you slow down American industry in such a way that China or somebody else makes faster progress. A second, and I think this can happen with the regulatory pressure should be on us. It should be on Google. It should be on the other small set of people in the lead the most. We don't want to slow down smaller startups. We don't want to slow down open source efforts. We still need them to comply with things. You can still cause great harm with a smaller model, but leaving the room and the space for new ideas and new companies and independent researchers to do their work and not putting a regulatory burden that, say, a company like us could handle, but a smaller one couldn't. I think that's another peril, and it's clearly a way that regulation has gone.
Okay. Mr. Marcus, or Professor Marcus?
The other obvious peril is regulatory capture. If we make it appear as if we are doing something, but it's more like greenwashing and nothing really happens. We just keep out the little players because we put so much burden that only the big players can do it. So there are also those kinds of perils. I fully agree with everything that Mr. Altman said, and I would add that to the list.
Okay. Ms. Montgomery?
One of the things I would add to the list is the risk of not holding companies accountable for the harms that they're causing today. Right, so we talk about misinformation in electoral systems.
So no
agency or no
agency,
kind of we need to hold companies responsible today and accountable for AI that they're deploying that disseminates misinformation on things like elections and where the risk.
You know, a regulatory agency would do a lot of the things that Senator Graham was talking about. You know, you don't build a nuclear reactor without getting a license. You don't build an AI system without getting a license that gets tested independently.
I think it's a great analogy.
Right. We need both pre-deployment and post-deployment.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Wells. Let me ask a few more questions. You've all been very, very patient, and the turnout today, which is beyond our subcommittee, I think reflects both your value in what you're contributing as well as the interest in this topic. There are a number of subjects that we haven't covered at all. One was just alluded to by Professor Marcus, which is the monopolization danger, the dominance of markets that excludes new competition and thereby inhibits or prevents innovation and invention, which we have seen in social media, as well as some of the old industries, airlines, automobiles, and others where consolidation has narrowed competition. And so I think we need to focus on kind of an old area of antitrust, which dates more than a century, still inadequate to deal with the challenges we have right now in our economy. And certainly we need to be mindful of the way that rules can enable the big guys to get bigger and exclude innovation and competition, and responsible good guys, such as are represented in this industry right now. We haven't dealt with national security. There are huge implications for national security. I will tell you, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, classified briefings on this issue have abounded, and the threats that are posed by some of our adversaries. China has been mentioned here, but the sources of threats to this nation in this space are very real and urgent. We're not going to deal with them today, but we do need to deal with them, and we will, hopefully, in this committee. And then on the issue of a new agency, you know, I've been doing this stuff for a while. I was Attorney General of Connecticut for 20 years. I was a federal prosecutor, the U.S. attorney. Most of my career has been in enforcement. And I will tell you something, you can create 10 new agencies, but if you don't give them the resources, and I'm talking not just about dollars, I'm talking about scientific expertise, you guys will run circles around them. And it isn't just the models or the generative AI that will run circles around them, but it is the scientists in your companies. For every success story in government regulation, you can think of 5 failures. That's true of the FDA, it's true of the IAEA, it's true of the SEC, it's true of the whole alphabet list of government agencies. And I hope our experience here will be different, but the Pandora's box requires more than just the words or the concepts, licensing, new agency. There's some real hard decision-making, as Ms. Montgomery has alluded to, about how to frame the rules to fit the risks. First, do no harm. Make it effective. Make it enforceable. Make it real. I think we need to grapple with the hard questions here that, you know, frankly, this initial hearing, I think, has raised very successfully, but not answered. And I thank our colleagues who have participated and made these very creative suggestions. I'm very interested in enforcement. I, you know, literally 15 years ago, I think, advocated abolishing Section 230. What's old is new again. You know, now people are talking about abolishing Section 230. Back then it was considered completely unrealistic. But enforcement really does matter. I want to ask Mr. Altman, because of the privacy issue, and you've suggested that you have an interest in protecting the privacy of the data that may come to you or be available. What specific steps do you take to protect privacy?
Well, one is that we don't train on any data submitted to our API. So if you're a business customer of ours and submit data, we don't train on it at all. We do retain it for 30 days solely for the purpose of trust and safety enforcement, but that's different than training on it. If you use ChatGPT, you can opt out of us training on your data. You can also delete your conversation history or your whole account.
Ms. Montgomery, I know you don't deal directly with consumers, but do you take steps to protect privacy as well?
Absolutely. And we even filter our large language models for content that includes personal information that may have been pulled from public data sets as well. So we apply additional level of filtering.
Professor Marcus, you made reference to self-awareness, self-learning. Already we're talking about the potential for jailbreaks. How soon do you think that new kind of generative AI will be usable, will be practical?
New AI that is self-aware and so forth? Or,
Yes.
I mean, I have no idea on that one. I think we don't really understand what self-awareness is, and so it's hard to put a date on it. In terms of self-improvement, there's some modest self-improvement in current systems, but one could imagine a lot more, and that could happen in 2 years, it could happen in 20 years. The basic paradigms that haven't been invented yet, some of them we might want to discourage. But it's a bit hard to put timelines on them. And just going back to enforcement for 1 second, one thing that is absolutely paramount, I think, is far greater transparency about what the models are and what the data are. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody in the general public has to know exactly what's in one of these systems, but I think it means that there needs to be some enforcement arm that can look at these systems, can look at the data, can perform tests and so forth.
Let me ask you, all of you, I think there has been a reference to elections and banning outputs involving elections. Are there other areas where you think, what are the other high risk or highest risk areas where you would either ban or establish especially strict rules? Ms. Montgomery.
The space around misinformation, I think, is a hugely important one. And coming back to the points of transparency, knowing what content was generated by AI is going to be a really critical area that we need to address.
Any others?
I think medical misinformation is something to really worry about. We have systems that hallucinate things. They're going to hallucinate medical advice. Some of the advice they'll give is good, some of it's bad. We need really tight regulation around that. Same with psychiatric advice, people using these things as kind of ersatz therapists. I think we need to be very concerned about that. I think we need to be concerned about internet access for these tools when they can start making requests, both of people and internet things. It's probably okay if they just do search, but as they do more intrusive things on the internet, like do we want them to be able to order equipment or order chemistry and so forth? So as we empower these systems more by giving them internet access, I think we need to be concerned about that. And then we've hardly talked at all about long-term risks. Sam alluded to it briefly. I don't think that's where we are right now, but as we start to approach machines that have a larger footprint on the world beyond just having a conversation, we need to worry about that and think about how we're going to regulate that and monitor it and so forth.
In a sense, we've been talking about bad guys or certain bad actors manipulating AI to do harm.
Manipulating people.
And manipulating people, but also generative AI can manipulate the manipulators.
It can. I mean, there's many layers of manipulation that are possible, and I think we don't yet really understand the consequences. Dan Dennett just sent me a manuscript last night that will be in the Atlantic in a few days on what he calls counterfeit people. It's a wonderful metaphor. These systems are almost like counterfeit people, and we don't really honestly understand what the consequence of that is. They're not perfectly human-like yet, but they're good enough to fool a lot of the people a lot of the time, and that introduces lots of problems, for example, cybercrime and how people might try to manipulate markets and so forth. So it's a serious concern.
In my opening, I suggested 3 principles: transparency, accountability, and limits on use. Would you agree that those are a good starting point? Ms. Montgomery?
100%. And as you also mentioned, industry shouldn't wait for Congress. That's what we're doing here at IBM.
There's no reason that industry
Absolutely.
should wait for Congress.
Yep.
Professor Marcus?
I think those 3 would be a great start. I mean, there are things like the White House Bill of Rights, for example, that show, I think, a large consensus, the UNESCO guidelines and so forth, show a large consensus around what it is we need. And the real question is definitely now, how are we going to put some teeth in it, try to make these things actually enforced? So, for example, we don't have transparency yet. We all know we want it, but we're not doing enough to enforce it.
Mr. Altman?
I certainly agree that those are important points. I would add that, and Professor Marcus touched on this, I would add that as we spent most of the time today on current risks, and I think that's appropriate, and I'm very glad we have done it, as these systems do become more capable, and I'm not sure how far away that is, but maybe not super far, I think it's important that we also spend time talking about how we're going to confront those challenges.
Having talked to you privately,
You know how much I care.
I agree that you care deeply and intensely, but also that prospect of increased danger or risk resulting from even more complex and capable AI mechanisms certainly may be closer than a lot of people appreciate.
Let me just add for the record that I'm sitting next to Sam, closer than I've ever sat to him except once before in my life, and that his sincerity in talking about those fears is very apparent physically in a way that it just doesn't communicate on the television screen, but communicates from here.
Thank you. Senator Hawley?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for a great hearing. Thanks to the witnesses. So I've been keeping a little list here of the potential downsides or harms, risks of generative AI, even in its current form. Let's just run through it. Loss of jobs. And this isn't speculative. I think your company, Ms. Montgomery, has announced that it's potentially laying off 7,800 people, a third of your non-consumer facing workforce because of AI. So loss of jobs, invasion of privacy, personal privacy, on a scale we've never before seen, manipulation of personal behavior, manipulation of personal opinions, and potentially the degradation of free elections in America. Did I miss anything? I mean, this is quite a list. I noticed that an eclectic group of about 1,000 technology and AI leaders, everybody from Andrew Yang to Elon Musk, recently called for a 6-month moratorium on any further AI development. Were they right? Do you join those calls? Are they right to do that? Should we pause for 6 months?
Your characterization's not quite correct. I actually signed that letter. About 27,000 people signed it. It did not call for a ban on all AI research. It only called, nor on all AI, but only on a very specific thing, which would be systems like GPT-5. Every other piece of research that's ever been done, it was actually supportive or neutral about, and it specifically called for more research on trustworthy and safe AI.
So you think that we should take a moratorium, a 6-month moratorium or more on anything beyond ChatGPT-4?
I took the letter. What is the famous phrase? Spiritually, not literally. What was the famous phrase?
Well, I'm asking for your opinion now, though. So
my opinion is that the moratorium that we should focus on is actually deployment until we have good safety cases. I don't know that we need to pause that particular project, but I do think its emphasis on focusing more on AI safety, on trustworthy, reliable AI is exactly right.
Deployment means not making it available to the public?
Yeah, so
that?
my concern is about things that are deployed at a scale of, let's say, 100 million people without any external review. I think that we should think very carefully about doing that.
What about you, Mr. Altman? Do you agree with that? Would you pause any further development for 6 months or longer?
So first of all, after we finished training GPT-4, we waited more than 6 months to deploy it. We are not currently training what will be GPT-5. We don't have plans to do it in the next 6 months. But I think the frame of the letter is wrong. What matters is audits, red teaming, safety standards that a model needs to pass before training. If we pause for 6 months, then I'm not sure what we do then. Do we pause for another 6? Do we kind of come up with some rules then? The standards that we have developed and that we've used for GPT-4 deployment, we want to build on those, but we think that's the right direction, not a calendar clock pause. There may be times, I expect there will be times when we find something that we don't understand and we really do need to take a pause, but we don't see that yet. Never mind all the benefits.
You don't see what yet? You're comfortable with all of the potential ramifications from the current existing technology?
I'm sorry, we don't see the reasons to not train a new one. For deploying, as I mentioned, I think there's all sorts of risky behavior and there's limits we put. We have to pull things back sometimes, add new ones. I mean, we don't see something that would stop us from training the next model, where we'd be so worried that we'd create something dangerous, even in that process, let alone the deployment. But that may happen.
What about you, Ms. Montgomery?
I think we need to use the time to prioritize ethics and responsible technology as opposed to pausing development.
Well, wouldn't a pause in development help the development of protocols for safety standards and ethics?
I'm not sure how practical it is to pause, but we absolutely should be prioritizing safety protocols.
Okay, the point about practicality leads me to this. I'm interested in this talk about an agency, and maybe that would work, although having seen how agencies work in this government, they usually get captured by the interests that they're supposed to regulate. They usually get controlled by the people who they're supposed to be watching. I mean, that's just been our history for 100 years. Maybe this agency would be different. I have a little different idea. Why don't we just let people sue you? Why don't we just make you liable in court? We can do that. We know how to do that. We can pass a statute. We can create a federal right of action that will allow private individuals who are harmed by this technology to get into court and to bring evidence into court. And it can be anybody. I mean, you want to talk about crowdsourcing. We'll just open the courthouse doors. We'll define a broad right of action, private citizens, be class actions. We'll just open it up. We'll allow people to go into court. We'll allow them to present evidence. They say that they were harmed by, they were given medical misinformation. They were given election misinformation, whatever. Why not do that, Mr. Altman?
I mean, please forgive my ignorance. Can't people sue us?
Well, you're not protected by Section 230, but there's not currently, I don't think, a federal right of action, private right of action that says that if you are harmed by generative AI technology, we will guarantee you the ability to get into court.
Oh, well, I think there's like a lot of other laws where if, technology harms you, there's standards that we could be sued under, unless I'm really misunderstanding how things work. If the question is, are clearer laws about the specifics of this technology and consumer protection is a good thing, I would say definitely yes.
The laws that we have today were designed long before we had artificial intelligence, and I do not think they give us enough coverage. The plan that you propose, I think, as a hypothetical, would certainly make a lot of lawyers wealthy, but I think it would be too slow to affect a lot of the things that we care about, and there are gaps in the law. For example, we don't really...
Wait, you think it'd be slower than Congress?
Yes, I do, in some ways.
Really?
Well,
Do you know that?
litigation can take a decade or more.
Oh,
I
but the
think you
threat
guys-
of litigation is a powerful tool. I mean, how would IBM like to be sued for $100 billion?
in no way asking to take litigation off the table among the tools, but I think, for example, if I can continue, there are areas like copyright where we don't really have laws. We don't really have a way of thinking about wholesale misinformation as opposed to individual pieces of it, where, say, a foreign actor might make billions of pieces of misinformation, or a local actor. We have some laws around market manipulation we could apply, but we get in a lot of situations where we don't really know which laws apply. There would be loopholes. The system is really not thought through. In fact, we don't even know that 230 does or does not apply here, as far as I know. I think that that's something a lot of people speculated about this afternoon, but it's not solid.
Well, we could fix that.
Well, the question is how.
Oh, easy. It would be easy for us to say that Section 230 doesn't apply to generative AI. Ms. Montgomery, I'll give you the
think
last
that's an
word.
important
I'll yield,
start.
Mr. Chairman.
You
Just on the point of-
suggested, Ms. Montgomery, a duty of care, which I think fits the idea of a private right of action.
No, that's exactly right. And also, AI is not a shield, right? So if a company discriminates in granting credit, for example, or in the hiring process, by virtue of the fact that they relied too significantly on an AI tool, they're responsible for that today, regardless of whether they used a tool or a human to make that decision.
I'm going to turn to Senator Booker for some final questions, but I just want to make a quick point here on the issue of the moratorium. I think we need to be careful. The world won't wait. The rest of the global scientific community isn't going to pause. We have adversaries that are moving ahead, and sticking our head in the sand is not the answer. Safeguards and protections, yes, but a flat stop sign, sticking our head in the sand, I would be very, very worried about.
Without militating for any sort of pause, I would just again emphasize there is a difference between research, which surely we need to do to keep pace with our foreign rivals, and deployment at really massive scale. You could deploy things at the scale of 1 million people or 10 million people, but not 100 million people or 1 billion people. And if there are risks, you might find them out sooner and be able to close the barn doors before the horses leave rather than after.
Senator Booker.
Yeah, there will be no pause. I mean, there's no enforcement body to force a pause. It's just not going to happen. It's nice to call for it for any just reasons or whatsoever, but forgive me for sounding skeptical. Nobody's pausing. This thing is racing.
I would agree. I don't think it's a realistic thing in the world. The reason I personally signed the letter was to call attention to how serious the problems were and to emphasize spending more of our efforts on trustworthy and safe AI rather than just making a bigger version of something we already know to be unreliable.
Yeah. So I'm a futurist. I love exciting about the future, and I guess there's a famous question, if you couldn't control for your race, your gender, where you would land on the planet Earth, or what time in humanity would you want to be born? Everyone would say right now. It's still the best time to be alive because of technology, innovation, and everything. And I'm excited about what the future holds. But the destructiveness that I've also seen as a person that's seen the transformative technologies of a lot of the technologies of the last 25 years is what really concerns me. And one of the things, especially with companies that are designed to want to keep my attention on screens, and I'm not just talking about new media, 24-hour cable news is a great example of people that want to keep your eyes on screens. I have a lot of concerns about the corporate intention. And Sam, this is again why I find your story so fascinating to me, and your values that I believe in from our conversations so compelling to me. But absent that, I really want to just explore what happens when these companies that are already controlling so much of our lives. A lot has been written about the FANG companies. What happens when they are the ones that are dominating this technology as they did before? So Professor Marcus, does that have any concern, the role that corporate power, corporate concentration has in this realm, that a few companies might control this whole area?
I radically changed the shape of my own life in the last few months, and it was because of what happened with Microsoft releasing Sydney, and it didn't go the way I thought it would. In one way it did, which is I anticipated the hallucinations. I wrote an essay, which I have in the appendix, What to Expect When You're Expecting GPT-4, and I said that it would still be a good tool for misinformation, that it would still have trouble with physical reasoning, psychological reasoning, that it would hallucinate. And then along came Sydney, and the initial press reports were quite favorable. And then there was the famous article by Kevin Roose in which it recommended he get a divorce. And I had seen Tay and I had seen Galactica from Meta, and those had been pulled after they had problems. And Sydney clearly had problems. What I would have done, had I run Microsoft, which clearly I do not, would have been to temporarily withdraw it from the market. And they didn't. And that was a wake-up call to me and a reminder that even if you have a company like OpenAI that is a nonprofit, and Sam's values, I think, have come clear today, other people can buy those companies and do what they like with them. And maybe we have a stable set of actors now, but the amount of power that these systems have to shape our views and our lives is really, really significant. And that doesn't even get into the risks that someone might repurpose them deliberately for all kinds of bad purposes. And so in the middle of February, I stopped writing much about technical issues in AI, which is most of what I've written about for the last decade, and said, I need to work on policy. This is frightening.
And Sam, I want to give you an opportunity as my sort of last a question or so. Don't you have concerns about? I mean, I graduated from Stanford. I know so many of the players in the Valley, from VC folks, angel folks, to a lot of founders of companies that we all know. Do you have some concern about a few players with extraordinary resources and power to influence Washington? I mean, I see us. I'm a big believer in the free market, but the reason why I walk into a bodega and a Twinkie is cheaper than an apple, or a Happy Meal costs less than a bucket of salad, is because of the way the government tips the scales to pick winners and losers. So the free market is not what it should be when you have large corporate power that can even influence the game here. Do you have some concerns about that in this next era of technological innovation?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's so much of why we started OpenAI. We have huge concerns about that. I think it's important to democratize the inputs to these systems, the values that we're going to align to. And I think it's also important to give people wide use of these tools. When we started the API strategy, which is a big part of how we make our systems available for anyone to use, there was a huge amount of skepticism over that, and it does come with challenges, that's for sure. But we think putting this in the hands of a lot of people and not in the hands of a few companies is really quite important. And we are seeing the resultant innovation boom from that. But it is absolutely true that the number of companies that can train the true frontier models is going to be small just because of the resources required. And so I think there needs to be incredible scrutiny on us and our competitors. I think there is a rich and exciting industry happening of incredibly good research and new startups that are not just using our models, but creating their own. And I think it's important to make sure that whatever regulatory stuff happens, whatever new agencies may or may not happen, we preserve that fire, because that's critical.
I'm a big believer in the democratizing potential of technology, but I've seen the promise of that fail time and time again, where people said, oh, this is going to have a big democratizing force. My team works on a lot of issues about the reinforcing of bias through algorithms, the failure to advertise certain opportunities in certain zip codes. But you seem to be saying, and I heard this with Web3, that this is going to be DeFi, decentralized finance, all these things are going to happen. But this seems to me not even to offer that promise, because the people who are designing these, it takes so much power, energy, resources. Are you saying that that my dreams of technology further democratizing opportunity and more are possible within a technology that is ultimately, I think, going to be very centralized to a few players who already control so much?
So this point that I made about use of the model and building on top of it, this is really a new platform, right? it is definitely important to talk about who's going to create the models. I want to do that. I also think it's really important to decide to whose values we're going to align these models. But in terms of using the models, the people that build on top of the OpenAI API do incredible things. And it's, people frequently comment like, I can't believe you get this much technology for this little money. And so what the companies people are building, putting AI everywhere, using our API, which does let us put safeguards in place, I think that's quite exciting. And I think that is how it is being not how it's going to be, but how it is being democratized right now. There is a whole new Cambrian explosion of new businesses, new products, new services happening by lots of different companies on top of these models.
And so I'll say, Chairman, as I close, that most industries resist even reasonable regulation, from seatbelt laws to we've been talking a lot recently about rail safety. The only way we're going to see the democratization of values, I think, and while there are noble companies out there, is if we create rules of the road that enforce certain safety measures like we've seen with other technology. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Booker. And I couldn't agree more that in terms of consumer protection, which I've been doing for a while, participation by the industry is tremendously important, and not just rhetorically, but in real terms, because we have a lot of industries that come before us and say, oh, we're all in favor of rules, but not those rules. Those rules we don't like. And it's every rule, in fact, that they don't like. And I sense that there is a willingness to participate here that is genuine and authentic. I thought about asking ChatGPT to do a new version of "Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow," because that's what we need to be doing here. And as Senator Hawley has pointed out, Congress doesn't always move at the pace of technology, and that may be a reason why we need a new agency, but we also need to recognize the rest of the world is going to be moving as well. And you've been enormously helpful in focusing us and illuminating some of these questions, and performed a great service by being here today. So thank you to every one of our witnesses. And I'm going to close the hearing, leave the record open for 1 week. In case anyone wants to submit anything, I encourage any of you who have either manuscripts that are going to be published or observations from your companies to submit them to us. And we look forward to our next hearing. This one is closed.
Sam.